Doing the sermon series, Walking in the Light, starting that today. And I don't know about you, I really don't enjoy walking in the dark. You might have a lot of problems walking in the dark. It's usually an issue. I've walked in the dark many times. I have a cat. Anybody have a cat? Yeah. I got a cat, and I didn't keep the receipt, so I couldn't return it, unfortunately. No. I like my cat. But you walk in the dark and we have a cat in your house. I've stepped on a few things over the years, thanks to the cat, you know. When you walk in the dark, you don't see where you're going. You don't see what's coming. And so it's important to talk about how do we walk in the light, spiritually speaking, in our discipleship journey as followers of Jesus. How do we do that? And so the next 5 weeks we'll be looking at walking in the light. It's really a series on spiritual warfare, about shadows that block the light of God in our lives. And we're going to be talking about them more specifically every week. So it is really a series about victory, about focusing on the victory of God in our lives. So if that's you or someone you know, please tune in and continue to listen to hear about victory. We need to hear about these words from God in our lives, walking in the light. So next week, we're looking at the shadow of despair, the shadow of shame, the shadow of lust, the shadow of loneliness, and the shadow of ambition, to see the kind of roadmap where we'll be going. The text where it'll be kind of overarching throughout is 1 John chapter 1. And in this text, you'll see that there's a few things John states, that God is light. In him there is no darkness at all. Secondly, that when we sin, it can cause us to fall away in a sense. Shadows can fall over our lives. And if we don't admit that freely, honestly, John's saying, then you really aren't walking in the light. You're not being honest. Spiritual awakening and growth just looks a lot like honesty. It's just a lot of just being honest with God. Don't pretend that you're not a sinner, you've made mistakes, you need forgiveness. The beginning point of spiritual healing begins when we're just honest with God and with ourselves. And and thirdly, you'll see in this text that we were made for the light, not the shadows. That we are created as people, not to be people that live in darkness. But that Jesus, as the light of the world, wants all people to walk in light. So here's the words from 1 John 1, verses 5 through 7. If you brought a Bible, please read along or look at the screen. This is the message we have heard from him, from Jesus, and proclaimed to you, that God is light, and in him there is no darkness at all. If we say that we have fellowship with him while we are walking in darkness, we lie and do not do what is true. But if we walk in the light, as he himself is in the light, we have fellowship with one another, and the blood of Jesus, his son, cleanses us from all sin. So today we're looking at the eclipse. What happens in our lives when shadows cover our lives, our spiritual lives, and block the light of God in our lives? As John said, if we don't claim to really walk in darkness or claim the need for forgiveness of sin, then we're really lying to ourselves. That sometimes things in life, though, do eclipse the presence. It can feel like it's eclipsed the presence of God in our lives. Just a few weeks ago, we had an eclipse. Did anyone go outside and stare at the sun? You know, most of us did. Like you, I was scrambling for eclipse glasses at the last minute, and I could find them absolutely nowhere. So I went to Home Depot, and I bought a welder's helmet so that we could look at the sun. And even then, it wasn't quite enough. So I put on sunglasses and then the welder's glasses so I could look at the eclipse that just happened just for a minute or two. It wasn't very long. We weren't really in the path of totality, but you got to get that feel of it, that it gets kind of eerily quiet and like twilight and the birds are quiet and everything. Physically, we need light to survive. We need sunlight as physical beings. I researched this week, we have apparently photoreceptors in our skin that we need sunlight, almost like a plant. We need vitamin D and all those sorts of things. Without light, we die. Life does not exist on the face of the earth without sun and light. So physically, we can all agree on that. But spiritually, we need light as well. We need truth and light to shine upon our lives, that we're made for light, physically and spiritually. So John shows a fundamental truth here that God is light, and in him there is no darkness at all, no shadow of turning, no malfeasance, no lying, no trickery, and that where God resides, heaven is a place of perpetual light. As the book of Revelation says, that the Lamb is the light to the people. God himself is the source of light. Imagine a place where there is no sunset or sunrise because God is the light. Imagine a place where there is no horizon line because it's not on earth. God is the source of light, and from him proceeds all good things. Conversely, hell is a place where there's an absence of God. So it is very much a place of darkness and anger and confusion, utter darkness, violence. Even Jesus said he called it a place of outer darkness, a place of gnashing of teeth. So we all know this, that at nighttime, crimes go up. People seem to think because the sun is down, no one will see what I've done and I'll get away with it, right? As if God doesn't see everything to begin with. But we have this tendency to think that because it's dark, no one's going to know. And we hide and we shame ourselves. We hide in this place of shame and darkness. But in the spiritual world, and we're going to look at this more in detail, the enemy of our souls, his desire is not just to occasionally lead people to darkness, but he wants to keep you there. He doesn't just want you to fail. He wants you to stay in a place of failure. He doesn't just want us to occasionally feel shame or accusation, which we certainly feel, but he wants to keep us in those places of despair, where all hope is lost, because he's the ultimate at projecting. He is doing the very thing he is guilty of. He is living in a place of darkness and despair and hopelessness, and he projects that onto other people. Does that make sense? This is who the devil is. So it makes very much sense that out of his agony and his desperation, that's what he's trying to do, to not just want to make you feel like a failure, but to keep you in a place of failure. And we're going to see a story here that gives us a bit of specifics. Luke chapter 22, you see Peter and Jesus having a conversation. And you've read this story many times, and I have too. But if you see what Satan kind of shows, he kind of tips his hand with his tactics. And Jesus gives us a bit of a snapshot here. Starting in verse 31 of Luke 22. Jesus says, "Simon, Simon, listen, Satan has demanded to sift all of you like wheat. But I prayed for you that your own faith may not fail. And you, once you have returned back, strengthen your brothers." And Peter said to him, "Lord, I'm ready to go with you to prison and to death." Jesus said, "I tell you, Peter, the cock will not crow this day until you've denied 3 times that you know me." This is a very startling conversation because, for one, Jesus is aware that the devil is trying to destroy Peter, and not just Peter, but he says, all of you, meaning all the disciples. Why wouldn't Jesus just go, "No, Satan, I block you, I'll strike you down"? He doesn't do that. And instead, he prays for Peter. And he prays that Peter will not, what is the word he used? Fail. So he's implying that Satan's desire is just to see Peter fail. He wants him to fail. And Jesus was praying for him not to fail. I don't know about you, but I really don't like failing. When I played basketball for many years, I never wanted to lose a game. And if you probably played sports, losing sucks. We don't want to lose. We don't want to feel like failures. I played on a basketball team one summer that lost every single game in a summer. We never won a game. It was just torturous, And people go, "Oh, well, learn from your mistakes," I'm like, don't say that. No one wants to lose that much. But, you learn, you do try to learn from it, and you get better and stronger. But that type of failure is not what we're really looking at here. This is a deeper, more metaphysical type of failure we're talking about, that Jesus is warning Peter about. Satan wants Peter to fail against God. He wants Peter to feel like he has let God down. Like, that is like the ultimate shame. I let Jesus down. I mean, talk about rough. You know, personal failure, no one really likes to fail personally because you feel this inner churning, right? You feel this burning of your conscience. And when you fail personally and you know you have, what do? I know what I do. I get angry. I get angry at myself. I get angry at others. You can even get angry at God. And the hardest work can be the interior work of working through those feelings. But here's the good news about this story. Is that, well, what happens to Peter? He fails in the most ultimate, spectacular way. He lets Jesus down completely. And yet what happens? God takes the ultimate failure and uses it for his glory. He brings victory to Peter's life. So even when you feel like you've let God down, you can't let God down. Not ultimately. God's never going to leave your side. Failure can be a great teacher, but it can lead to great destruction when it becomes all about you and you take your eyes off God, when you put your eyes on the shadow of the failure and not on the light of God. So Satan's goal for Peter here is not just failure, but it's also his strategy for Peter. And that's what he tips his hand. Now, this is fascinating. The Greek word here for fail is eklepo. That's where we get our root word for eclipse. During an eclipse, light fails, right? So something comes between the light and you, and it casts a shadow. And we scramble in the dark. Luke uses the same word in the next chapter, Luke chapter 23. While Jesus has died on the cross, he uses the same word. It was now about noon, and darkness came over the whole land until 3 p.m, while the sun's light, eklepo, while the sun's light failed, and the curtain of the temple was torn in two. So when we fail in life, and it can be spectacular failures, whatever they have been, in Peter's situation here especially, he wants Peter to feel like God is gone, that God has forgotten him, and there's no chance of redemption, that you will forever struggle in the dark. And so when we feel this can feel overwhelming, of course. When Billy Graham would preach, many times he'd write about this. One time he was in Scotland in like 1975, and he said he got up to give a sermon, and he said, before I stood up and I began to talk, I felt this crushing sense of depression. And he wrote, I'm not a depressive person, but I felt this attack against me that was just trying to get me not to speak and preach the word. And so many times when you feel that resistance, it means you're moving in the right direction. Because Satan doesn't want good things to come from God's people, right? I mean, Satan knew who Peter was. He knew what Peter was going to accomplish. Of course he wanted to take him down. So when we come against resistance in this sense in your life, be encouraged. It means that God is doing great things in your life, but you can't see the whole totality of the story. Satan can. He has more bandwidth than we do in the spiritual world. But don't be discouraged by the shadows that come over our lives. It doesn't mean that God is done with you. Because the Bible is full of people like me and you who, when they got hit by an eclipse, the shadow fell over their life, they almost gave up. Peter, again, being one of the most devoted disciples, one of the inner circle, one of the most, he witnessed Jesus on the Mount of Transfiguration. He saw Jesus cast out demons. And yet Peter would deny Jesus and then go back to being a fisherman. Even though Jesus warned him it would happen, he still did it anyway. How could Peter turn back after seeing Jesus do so much light in the world? His fear eclipsed his faith. Or the Israelites in the wilderness. God delivers them from Egypt, and they see him do miraculous wonders, and they start to move toward this promised land after they saw the military might of Egypt and the gods of Egypt be thrown down. And yet, when it came time to claim the promised land, the people faltered. When they saw the size of the Canaanite cities, when they saw the physical size of some of their soldiers, their fear of the shadow eclipsed their faith in God. Numbers 13, this is what when they saw these men, these huge soldiers, we seemed like grasshoppers in our own eyes, but we looked the same to them. And the first generation that was delivered from the land of Egypt would never see the promised land. Most of them died in the wilderness. Or think of King David, a man after God's own heart, a young shepherd boy, pulled out of obscurity, anointed to be king of Israel. He had wealth and power and prestige and deep abiding faith in God. And yet, when it came time, he saw a beautiful woman bathing on the roof of a nearby building. He lusted after her and took her and had her husband killed, essentially, in battle. And the shadow crossed over his life of sin. But when you hear all those stories, for one, you should be encouraged because it definitely resonates with us as human beings, that we're reading stories about people who are not sinless and spotless and perfect. So you should be encouraged because hope is not lost. Eclipses don't last forever. That just because you see a shadow cast doesn't mean that the light is gone. Doesn't mean the sun has disappeared when the moon crosses in front of it. But to be encouraged to reposition your focus, your perspective on what is actually true. There's lots of things I love about worship and church and all of this. One is that it reminds you of what is true, right? I mean, we're in a world of so many lies, constant lies. It's the economy of the world, it seems. Satan is the prince of lies. Jesus said he's been a liar from the beginning. But that's what's so great is that we come into places like this and you hear what's actually true. Something you can actually sink your teeth into and build your life upon. And to learn that hope is not lost when shadows of sin fall over our lives. Don't take your eyes off the light of God. We can learn to fight with God's help. In 2006, there was a movie that came out called 300. I briefly watched some of it. It was pretty violent. Gerard Butler, shirtless, with his shield, ripped. They asked me to be an extra on the movie, and I said I was just too busy. I was too busy that time. But it famously recounts the story of the Battle of Thermopylae in the Greco-Persian Wars in 480 BC. King Leonidas led 300 of his elite Spartan soldiers against the Persian king Xerxes. This is a crazy story. They actually held the high ground. They had a pass, a narrow way that they could defend. 300 men would take on, it's estimated, 300,000 Persian soldiers. These Persians get off the boats, overwhelming force. Xerxes sees that he has an amazing military strength compared to their small numbers, and he sends a messenger to the Spartans and says, "You need to surrender, or else," quote, "our arrows will blot out the sun." And the Spartans replied with an all-time epic one-liner, "Then we will fight in the shade." Isn't that awesome? We will fight in the shade, King Xerxes. Satan has always been seeking to sift men and women like wheat. To not just make you feel like a failure, but to hold you in a place of failure. To eclipse the light of God with that failure. To try and blot out the light of the sun with his arrows. But take heart. Christians can learn and should learn how to fight in the shade. Because when the eclipse hits, be reminded the light has not gone anywhere. It's still there. You just maybe can't see it in the moment. Just this past week, I went to Atlanta. And I had not been there for many years. And if you didn't know this, I used to live, I was a kid in the 80s, I lived around Atlanta. We lived in Stone Mountain, we lived in Lilburn. And so we went to Stone Mountain for the day, and thank goodness now they have a cable car that'll take you to the top. Woo! $80. But we didn't have, so we took us straight to the top, and it was a beautiful view and everything, and it's great. And so then we drove from there, and we're trying to cut across over to 85 to get home. And as I'm driving, I'm like, this looks kind of like where I grew up. And I called my dad, and I said, what was the name of the street we grew up on? And he told me, and we were literally driving by the street I grew up on. So I said, well, I got to go look at this house. So we pulled down the street, and I saw the house we grew up in. I had not been there since 1986. And as I'm sitting there, I'm looking at this house. It reminded me of a story of a time when I was about 5 years old. And a lot of us did this when we were kids. You come against some sort of problem, or I saw someone do this in a TV show or something. They ran away from home, you know. And so what do? I pack a little backpack, and I put some Star Crunches in a backpack, and I put some juice boxes and other stuff, and I run away. And where do I run to? I remember I ran under the dining room table and sat under the dining room table. And that's where I hid for a little while. You know, there's good places to hide. Not all hiding is bad. Sometimes it's good to run, to hide in a good, strong, safe place. That God is like a fortress, and the righteous run to it and are saved. You know, and then after we left Lilburn, we went north, and we hit this city called Charlotte at 5 o'clock in the afternoon, and it's a sanctifying experience. It's a beautiful time. And we went on this wonderful road called Interstate 485. And I'm navigating all of these cars. And I used to live in that city for many years, but it's gotten way bigger. And I'm going around 485, and I see at every exit, there's cars backed up trying to turn to get off 485. There's so much traffic. And I had sort of a moment of clarity. And I thought, what is it we're rushing? Where are we rushing toward at rush hour? You might think, they're going home. And that's true. But I think more specifically, they're all rushing to a table. We're all rushing to a table, aren't we? A table at your house, someone else's house, a restaurant. We're going to a table. That's what we're rushing to. That's what we're hungry for, you know? It's intrinsic in our physical bodies. We want to find food. We're rushing to comfort. We're rushing not just home, but the heart of the home is the table. You know, Jesus' institution of the Last Supper, the Lord's Supper, communion, is brilliant in its simplicity and yet timeless in its relevance. That the table is a perfect place to come and hide, to come find shelter from the storm, to run to the table. It's an intrinsic need. That when Jesus poured out his blood on the cross, he was not merely a good man giving his life for bad people or just a martyr dying. It was the life of God poured out to redeem the world. And so when we come and we celebrate and we remember these gifts of bread and juice, it's so much more. It's the perfect place to bring your brokenness, to bring the ways that you feel like you failed, to come with those areas of your life and to know that, hey, if God can take take Simon and turn him into a Peter, he's not done with you, and he's not done with me. So when Jesus said, when you do this, do it in remembrance of me,